Hi, and welcome to today's video where I compare two people with the same personality disorders that you probably know, one being famous and the other being infamous. Today I'll be talking about schizopersonality disorder, or SPD, how I'll be referring to it in the rest of the video. Now, schizopersonality disorder is a cluster A disorder, meaning it's in the same family as schizophrenia, but is often hard to diagnose because sometimes it just gets brushed off as autism or a different disorder. Like most cluster A personality disorders, it is hard to diagnose in children and mostly only realized later into a patient's life. There are overt and covert characteristics, which, to put it simply, is how the person with the disorder portrays himself in social adaptations, interpersonal skills, and self-concept. Neither is considered good or bad, but some do have a negative outcome, which is how one person with the disorder could be a killer, while the other's a Nobel Peace Prize, which takes us right into the two people we will be talking about today. The first person is Albert Einstein, who created the theory of relativity and is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. To put it kindly, our not-so-good guy is a serial killer named Edmund Kemper, who murdered many different college girls and killed his mom. Just a little disclaimer for all of these videos that I'm going to be making. I am a strong believer that it is nurture over nature, so I'll be talking about their childhoods a lot, and this is just to bring light to different mental disorders and talk about how they're not all bad as they are portrayed in the media. So without further ado, let's get into Einstein's childhood. Now, he came from a loving, wealthy home. His uncle had his own business that his dad worked for. And he was really just allowed to express himself, which is very important from a young age. While he didn't talk for a while and is often portrayed as like he was a very poor student whenever he was younger, because they found that out and kind of ran with it. Media did. But while he was poor in some subjects, didn't make top of class in all of them, he was always pretty smart in science and math. And when I say he was allowed to express himself, he wasn't really pressed on any religion. His parents were Jewish, but they didn't really raise him Jewish. His dad actually referred to the religion as being fairy tale-ish, and they just didn't really bring him up as Jewish. He actually went to a Catholic school. He was later introduced into the religion, and he became a devout Jew. He was really able to question things himself when it came to theories. He was able to, question, hey, I don't believe this, and that's why he actually ended up coming up with most of his theories. So overall, he really had just a nice, welcoming, loving childhood. It was warm and able to express himself, be happy, and they were understanding of his different intellectual skills, being a late bloomer whenever it came to speaking. Now, to get into Edmund Kemper's childhood, his mom was really abusive. She didn't want a son. She already had a daughter. She would make him wear dresses, and she would constantly tell him horrible things about men and make him say horrible things about himself. And he never got to express himself. He went to go live with his grandparents, and at the age of 15, he actually murdered his grandma, and his grandpa came home and he murdered him as well, saying that he didn't want him to have to realize that he killed his grandma. He murdered both of them to see what it would feel like, and he went to a mental institution afterwards instead of jail, because he obviously was just not right. There he got his diagnosis, and he actually got along well with pretty much everyone that was there, but he was let out and went back to go live with his mom and back with that rocky. Einstein is already pretty well known about. We talk about him a lot growing up, so I'm not going to dive all the way into his life, just go over some of the key points and other things people may not know. It was obvious that he was a famous physicist. He created many theories along with gravity, time relativity, amongst many other things. He always questioned things, and he was very smart. He was also really above his time when it came to just civil rights and just treating everyone like they were human. He was one of the first people to go and teach a room full of African American men in college whenever that was not really seen as something that everyone did, and just he was such an intelligent man and gave his time, and whenever it was not even seen as something that was normal to do. Um, Whenever Germans were talking about different bombs they were using and things like that, he came and he gave the information to countries that he wasn't even born in, and really helped with just figuring all that out. And it was just things he didn't have to do. So overall, his upbringing didn't really affect, or his mental disorder didn't really affect what he did in his life, and I strongly believe it is due to his upbringing. Um, so he's just an overall really positive person, despite having SPD. Einstein is already pretty well known about. We talk about him a lot growing up, so I'm not going to dive all the way into his life. Just go over some of the key points and other things people may not know. It was obvious that he was a famous physicist. He created many theories along, like, with gravity, time relativity, amongst many other things. He always questioned things, and he was very smart. He was also really above his time when it came to just civil rights and just treating everyone like they were human. He was one of the first people to go and teach a room full of African American men in college whenever that was not really seen as something that everyone did, and just he was such an intelligent man and gave his time, and whenever it was not even seen as something that was normal to do. Whenever Germans were talking about different bombs they were using and things like that, he came and he gave the information to countries that he wasn't even born in, and really helped with just figuring all that out. And it was just things he didn't have to do. So overall, his mental disorder didn't really affect what he did in his life, and I strongly believe it is due to his upbringing. So he's just an overall really positive person, despite having SPD. Now, with Edmund Kemper, this was just not the case. He did have a very negative childhood, as I'd mentioned already. So a lot of the things he did were negative in his later life. He started off having a regular job once he got out of the mental institution. He was doing like laboring work, which was definitely above his intelligence. He had an extremely high IQ as well. But he just went into laboring work, as a lot of people who have negative childhoods, who are brought up never really thinking they are something do. They don't really ever reach their full potential, which is going to be a common theme as I talk about different serial killers. So as he did his laboring, he actually got an injury on his arm, and was able to actually stop working and just get checks from the government and from his past job, and that's what he lived off of. And he had a fine life just living off that. He still lived with his mom despite their toxic relationship, but that also gave him a lot of free time. With his free time, he did not spend it like a typical person. He decided that he was going to use it to abduct women and kill them. He would kill them, decapitate them, and commit certain acts on their heads, which is going to be an important thing. One of his famous quotes is, "Whenever I saw a pretty girl walking down the street, a part of me wanted to be nice to her and kiss her and take her on a date, and the other part of me wanted to kill her." So he definitely had a different set of mind whenever he was going about his daily life as Einstein did. Now, despite Edmund Kemper being a notorious killer and a sociopath because he didn't really display many emotions, he also was really understanding of his own disorder. Once he finished his final kill, which was his mom, and he killed her, decapitated her, did the same things that he did with the other women's heads, placed her head on a stake and set it outside of her window because whenever he was a child, he was forced to sit outside her window and watch them do fun things while he had to sit outside. He actually turned himself in, and he's had a couple appeals with the court, but in most of his appeals he says, well, I don't think it'd be good for me to enter society. I'd still have these urges and I would go and kill again. So he actually is very self-aware of what he did, which is intelligent in its own fact. He just had SPD, and that's how it affected him. He murdered people and had his own delusions of what he felt was correct and right. And I mean, it just affects everyone so differently. Like, Einstein is a famous physicist and did many great things, and Edmund Kemper was a self-aware serial killer. So thank you guys for watching. I hope to inform about this disorder, and I just think it's really important to take stigmatisms away from disorders like schizophrenia, because typically people with schizophrenia are actually very calm and docile, and with all cluster A personality disorders, including SPD. It's actually pretty atypical for someone with schizophrenia to act violently unless one of their delusions is making them think that something is wrong. So I just think it's important to keep things like that in mind and have an open mind whenever it comes to mental health. And don't be afraid of different diagnoses and people around you with those diagnoses.